Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It started on a quiet spring morning, the kind where the air felt soft and the scent of lilacs drifted lazily through the kitchen window. I was standing barefoot on the cool tile floor, sipping my coffee and letting the sunlight warm my face. At 58, I had grown comfortable with silence. My life wasn't noisy anymore. No kids to chase around, no deadlines to rush toward. Just the occasional calls from my cousin Laura, a few errands, and the gentle rhythm of a life mostly lived inside my own thoughts. That morning, I was expecting a knock at the door. Laura had asked me a few days earlier if her husband, Mark, could stop by to pick up an old set of garden tools we used to share. She and Mark had just bought a small cabin upstate, and they were trying their hand at a backyard garden. I hadn't seen Mark alone in years, maybe since one of our family barbecues long ago. But I said yes, of course. It was nothing, just a favor. When I heard the soft knock on the door, I glanced at the clock, 9:17 a.m., then patted across the hardwood to open it. And there he was. Mark stood with that familiar, calm presence he always carried. He looked a little older than I remembered, laugh lines deeper, hair more salt than pepper, but still effortlessly put together. A worn denim jacket hugged his broad shoulders, and his eyes, those gray-blue eyes, met mine with a warmth that felt like a balm. "Morning," he said, smiling. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," I said, stepping back to let him in. "Coffee?" He nodded, stepping inside. "I'd never say no to your coffee." There was something about Mark I'd always liked. He had a quiet steadiness to him, the kind of man who made you feel like the world could be burning, and he'd still offer you his jacket and hold your hand until it passed. Laura was lucky, I often thought. We sat at my little kitchen table, steam rising between us, and talked about nothing at first, weather, Laura's excitement over tomatoes, his long drive from the city. It felt easy, almost too easy, like slipping into a pair of shoes you forgot still fit. Then the conversation drifted. It always does, doesn't it, when people feel too comfortable. He asked how I'd been really, how I'd been since the divorce. Most people skirt around it, but Mark didn't. His voice was soft, not pitying, just curious. I told him the truth, that it had been hard, that some nights I still felt like I was waking up next to a ghost, that the loneliness was quieter now, but still there, always lingering just under the surface. He listened, really listened. Not the kind of listening where someone is just waiting to speak. He asked gentle questions, nodded at all the right places, and looked at me like he actually saw me. And for a moment, something inside me stirred. A small, fragile thing I hadn't felt in years. Not desire, at least not yet, but something closer to recognition. Like I'd been underwater for too long, and suddenly someone was holding out their hand to pull me back up. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "You didn't deserve that kind of pain." I looked down at my hands, the chipped polish on my nails. None of us do. But we all get our share, don't we? He reached out almost instinctively and placed his hand over mine. It was just a touch, nothing more. But it sent a ripple through my body I wasn't prepared for. His palm was warm, steady, familiar. I didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time. No words, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Eventually, he stood. I should grab those tools. Laura's waiting. I walked him to the garage, but the moment had already shifted. Something had passed between us, unspoken but heavy. He gathered the tools, tossed them in the back of his SUV, and stood there for a moment like he wanted to say something else. But instead, he gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "Thanks again." I watched him drive off, the gravel crunching under his tires, and my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every word, every glance, every silent pause between us. I told myself it was nothing, just a vulnerable morning, a kind man, a little too much coffee. But I couldn't lie to myself, not after how my stomach fluttered when he touched my hand. Over the next few days, I tried to shake it off. I baked, cleaned, even went for long walks around the neighborhood. But I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message that never came. Until one evening, about a week later, I heard another knock on the door. And there he was again. This time, without an excuse. "I was driving by," he said. "Thought maybe we could talk." I stood there, hand on the doorframe, heart in my throat. The sky behind him was dusky blue, and the porch light cast shadows across his face. He looked nervous, like a man who had rehearsed a speech but forgot all the lines. I stepped aside and let him in. We didn't speak at first. He followed me into the kitchen, and I poured us each a glass of wine. Red, deep, familiar, like comfort in a glass. "I haven't stopped thinking about the other day," he said finally, his voice low. "I know it wasn't supposed to mean anything. But it did, at least to me." I swallowed hard. It meant something to me, too. We sat again, closer this time. And there, under the weight of everything we weren't saying, something shifted. Not in a reckless, impulsive way, but slow, like a tide rising inch by inch. I started, then stopped. I didn't expect to feel this way, especially not with you. "I know," he said. "Neither did I." And then he leaned in, not forcefully, not boldly, just close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath and feel the warmth of his skin. I could have pulled away. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I didn't feel like a woman on the edge of a mistake. I felt like a woman who had finally remembered what it was like to be seen. He kissed me, softly, with reverence, like a man who wasn't sure he was allowed to want what he wanted. And when our lips parted, we looked at each other like we were both trying to understand what we'd just done. Nothing more happened that night. No rushing, no pushing. Just the quiet space between two people trying to figure out where their feelings fit in a world that had never made room for them. He left before midnight, promising nothing. And I stood at the window long after his car disappeared from view, wondering what it meant to want something that wasn't yours to want. I didn't know where this would lead. I still don't. But I do know one thing. That morning with my cousin's husband still haunts me, because it woke something in me I thought was gone forever. And now there's no putting it back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with the scent of him still lingering faintly in the kitchen air, as if the memory of his presence had soaked into the walls. My pillow felt colder than usual, the silence louder. I moved through the house with an ache I didn't quite understand, like I was bracing for something I couldn't name. I kept asking myself, what now? I didn't hear from Mark that day, or the day after, and part of me was relieved. The other part, the quieter and more dangerous part, missed him with a depth that surprised me. It's a strange thing to carry the weight of something that never fully happened. We hadn't crossed any clear line, not yet. But the boundary was thin now, nearly invisible. I could feel it every time I walked past the spot where he kissed me. I could feel it when I sat alone in the kitchen with a second glass of wine poured just in case. On Friday afternoon, Laura called. Her voice was bright, full of stories about the cabin, the birds that visited the feeder, the deer that peeked through the trees. I listened, trying to sound present, while guilt gnawed at my stomach like a splinter I couldn't remove. "I keep telling Mark we need to have you up here," she said. "It's peaceful, and you'd love the wildflowers." I forced a smile. "That sounds lovely." "He's been in such a good mood lately," she added. "Says it's the fresh air. Maybe it's the wine. Who knows?" I felt the sting of that comment. I wanted to believe it was the fresh air. I wanted to believe I wasn't part of the reason. After we hung up, I sat on the porch and watched the sky shift to dusk. I thought about the way Mark had looked at me, not just with desire, but with understanding. That kind of look was rare, and it felt unfair, somehow, that it came from someone tied to someone I loved. That evening, around 9:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Are you awake?" I knew who it was before I opened it. My heart thudded against my chest as I typed back, "Yes." 2 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared again. "I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the words for a long time. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, "I shouldn't have kissed you, but I don't regret it." I sat there in silence, phone warm in my hand, as the night pressed in around me. Finally, I wrote back, "Neither do I." That's how it began. We started talking, not every day, but often enough that my evenings began to feel like they belonged to him. We kept our conversations simple on the surface. Music, memories, the weight of middle age. But underneath, everything was charged. Every word felt like it hovered just above a confession. One night, I told him about the time my ex had left me waiting at a restaurant for over an hour on our anniversary. I told him how I'd stared at the flickering candle, pretending I was fine as the waiter asked for the 4th time if I was ready to order. Mark didn't say anything for a while. Then, with a roughness in his voice I hadn't heard before, he said, "You deserved better." It wasn't just that he said it. It was that he meant it. One afternoon, he came by again. He said he had a meeting nearby, but I knew better. We sat in the living room this time. He didn't bring up the last visit. Neither did I. But when he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face, I closed my eyes and let the warmth of his fingers linger on my skin. "I think about you all the time," he whispered. I opened my eyes slowly. "And Laura?" His hand dropped back to his lap. "I love her." "I do. But something's missing. Something I can't name." "And you think I'm that something?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at me like he wanted to say yes, but couldn't. "I don't know what I think anymore." We didn't touch that day. We didn't kiss. We just sat there, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. After he left, I cried, not because I felt ashamed, but because I realized I had crossed into a place I couldn't come back from, a place where I was waiting for someone else's husband to send me a message, to appear at my door, to need me in a way he didn't need her. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't want to fall into someone else's story. But I couldn't deny what had grown between us, quietly, steadily, like a vine creeping up a forgotten wall. One night, he asked if he could stay. Not just talk, not just visit, but stay. "I need to be near you," he said over the phone. "Just for one night. No expectations. Just, I need this." I stared at the ceiling, my heart thudding so loud I could barely hear my own breath. "You're asking me to risk everything," I whispered. "So am I," he said. I paused, then said, "Okay." That night, I changed the sheets. I lit candles, not because I expected romance, but because I needed the softness of flickering light to calm my nerves. I looked at myself in the mirror. The fine lines around my mouth, the softness of my jaw, the sadness I'd grown used to carrying. And still, something about me looked alive. When he arrived, he looked different too. Tired, like the weight of everything we were doing had caught up to him. But also somehow lighter, like being near me brought him peace. We talked for a long time about our childhoods, our regrets, the way people change without even realizing. He held my hand as we lay side by side on the couch, not speaking, just listening to the quiet. And then he kissed me again. This time longer, deeper. We didn't go any further that night. We just stayed in that space, between guilt and longing, between right and what felt right. When he left in the morning, he didn't promise anything. But he turned back at the door, looked at me with eyes that said everything he couldn't put into words, and whispered, "I'll never forget this." Neither would I. And yet, the morning after, as I stood in the same spot he had left, I began to feel something new. Not just desire, but fear. Because now, the haunting wasn't just about that morning. It was about what came next. I didn't see him for 2 weeks after that night. At first, the silence felt necessary. A pause, a space for breath, like the stillness between waves. I told myself we both needed time to think, to return to our corners of the world, and make sense of what had passed between us. But by the 7th day, I was restless. By the 10th, I was sick with doubt. Had it meant more to me than to him? Had it scared him? Had I scared myself? I checked my phone constantly, rereading old messages just to feel his voice again. I wandered the house as if he might somehow be hiding in the next room. It was absurd, I knew. But longing does that to you. It turns reason into background noise. Then one evening, I got a text. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words. No punctuation. No explanation. I replied simply, "Come by." An hour later, he was on my porch again, standing with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders drawn in like he was bracing for impact. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a purple hush across the neighborhood. I stepped aside, and he came in without a word. We sat in the living room, not touching this time. There was a weight between us, heavier now, like something had shifted. "I've been thinking," he said after a long pause, "about you, about Laura, about everything." Stayed quiet. "I don't want to hurt her," he said. "And I never wanted to hurt you. But I did, didn't I?" I looked at him then. His face was tired, lined with guilt, but also something else, maybe sorrow, maybe love. "I'm not asking you for anything," I said softly. "I just needed to know it wasn't one-sided." "It wasn't," he said quickly. "It's not. I haven't stopped thinking about that night. About every time I've seen you. I feel more myself when I'm with you than I have in years." I swallowed the ache that rose in my throat. "But I love my wife," he added, quieter now. "And I can't pretend I don't." "I know," I whispered. "That's what makes this so hard." He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. It was such a simple gesture, but it made me shiver. "I don't want to disappear from your life," he said. "But maybe we need to step back, just for a while, until I understand what I'm doing." My chest tightened, but I nodded. "That's fair." He stood then, lingering near the door. "I'll always carry this with me," he said. "You woke something in me, something I didn't know I'd lost." I nodded again, unable to speak. When the door closed behind him, I let myself cry, not just from the loss, but from the strange beauty of it all. I had felt something real. I had let myself feel again. The days that followed were quieter than ever. I moved slower, laughed less. But I also began to reclaim something I hadn't realized I'd given up, myself. I went to the farmer's market one Saturday morning and lingered by the flowers. A vendor offered me a bouquet of tulips, and I accepted without thinking. They were Laura's favorite. I almost set them back, but then I realized I liked them too. I cooked more. I sat on the porch in the early evenings, sipping tea instead of wine, watching the sky change. I even started painting again. Badly, of course, but it felt good to move color across canvas, even if it was just for me. One afternoon, I ran into Laura at the grocery store. She was glowing, cheeks pink from the sun, a soft scarf wrapped around her shoulders. "I've been meaning to call you," she said. "Mark's been working late a lot, but we're good. Really good, actually." I forced a smile. "That's wonderful." She leaned in. "He's been quieter lately. Thoughtful, but different. Like softer. Whatever you said to him that morning when he picked up the tools, it must have been the right words." I froze for a moment, then forced a laugh. Maybe it was just the coffee. She smiled and moved on, and I stood there in the cereal aisle, surrounded by boxes of cornflakes and granola, wondering if she could sense it. The shift, the change, the invisible thread still tying us all together. Later that night, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A letter, folded, sealed, written in blue ink. From Mark. He hadn't signed it. He hadn't needed to. He wrote about the cabin, about how he saw me in the colors of the leaves, in the way the wind moved through the trees. He wrote about our conversations, about the softness in my voice, about the way my presence made him feel awake. He didn't ask me to wait. He didn't make promises. He simply wrote, "Whatever this was, I'll carry it in my heart." Not as regret, but as something rare, something sacred. I read that letter a dozen times, maybe more. Then I folded it back up and placed it in the drawer next to my bed. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. And yet something inside me had changed, quietly, like a tide slowly pulling away from the shore, leaving behind a stretch of beach that had never known such light. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful. Not because he had made me feel that way, but because I had allowed myself to see it. A few months passed. The seasons changed, summer folding into a soft, golden autumn. My days became quieter again, but not in the hollow, aching way they once were. The quiet now felt earned, gentle, peaceful, even, like a long exhale after holding my breath for too many years. Mark didn't come by. He didn't call or write again, and I didn't expect him to. But I thought about him often, not with desperation or longing, but with something quieter, something that sat in my chest like an old photograph you don't need to look at anymore because you already know it by heart. I still kept his letter, still folded neatly, still unread since the last time I placed it in my drawer. But sometimes, when the house was particularly still and the wind rustled the curtains just right, I would sit on the edge of the bed and run my fingertips over the envelope. I never opened it again. Life continued in its slow, steady way. I started teaching a watercolor class at the community center just once a week. Mostly older women, some widows, some newly retired, some just looking for a reason to leave the house. We'd laugh over crooked flower petals and talk about everything but the things we feared the most. And somehow, it helped. One day during class, I found myself painting a pair of hands, one resting gently over another. I hadn't meant to. I didn't even realize what I was doing until I stepped back from the canvas and saw it clearly. I smiled just a little. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just felt present. One Sunday afternoon in late October, I decided to take a drive upstate. The trees had turned brilliant shades of red and orange, and I needed the open road. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not that anyone would have asked, but I packed a thermos of tea, put on my warmest sweater, and let the road carry me north. I didn't go to their cabin. I wouldn't have dared. But I stopped at a nearby overlook, one I remembered from a childhood trip. The valley stretched wide beneath me, sun-dappled and quiet, the trees ablaze in color. I sat on a bench and sipped my tea, letting the breeze press against my cheeks. And then I saw them. Far off in the distance, a couple walking along the ridge trail, just silhouettes really. They were holding hands, moving slowly, talking or maybe just being quiet together. I couldn't see their faces, but I didn't need to. I knew it was Mark and Laura. My heart didn't leap. It didn't break. It just beat, steady and soft, the way it's meant to. I watched them for a moment, then turned away and let my eyes wander to the trees again. There was a kind of relief in that moment, a quiet understanding that what we'd shared hadn't been for forever. It wasn't meant to be, but it was meant to happen. Because it reminded me I was still capable of feeling, still capable of being seen, still capable of loving, not just someone else, but myself. That night, back home, I lit a single candle and sat at the kitchen table. I poured a glass of red wine and toasted the air. To what almost was, I whispered, and to who I am now. I took a long, slow sip, letting it warm me from the inside out. Life didn't magically change after that. My days were still quiet. My nights still filled with old books and soft music, but something inside me had shifted in a way that wouldn't be undone. And strangely, I no longer felt alone. Because I had found something unexpected and deeply emotional, in a place I never looked, in the arms of a man I could never keep. And in losing him, I had rediscovered the parts of myself I thought were gone for good. That morning with my cousin's husband still haunts me, but not with shame, with gratitude. Because some connections, no matter how brief or complicated, are meant to change us. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives are the ones that leave us asking what if, but also help us say, I'm enough with a little more certainty than before.